The fundamental experience of the emotional communication between an infant and its mother, or, for example, between a patient and his or her analyst, have two really important themes to consider, especially related to the concept of time. One is the importance of the container-contained relationship, and the other is the primal importance of the relationship and the factor in one's development as an infant into a self. The idea of the concept container-contained already anticipates in advance the subsequent development of an infant, of attachment research, as well as to the rise in the intersubjective school of psychoanalysis and psychotherapy. The concept container-contained was originally developed by Wilfred Bion. Elsewhere in psychoanalytic literature, the concept container is used often, and unfortunately, it's misused, and the ideas about it are somewhat distorted. The concept of container-contained provides an unconscious template for the infant going forward. It doesn't mean it won't be able to be altered or changed. That's what a psychotherapeutic or psychoanalytic experience is about, is to change what's there in a deep way. But the whole meaning of this particular concept has to do with the fact that every infant is endowed with a capacity for tolerating frustration. How the infant learns how to tolerate frustration and how to tolerate presence and absence has everything to do with a parent's capacity for what we call reverie, and how one can be capable or not capable to supply the emotional and mental need of an infant, which is necessary for growth and development into the next phase of development. At the other extreme would be an infant who's incapable of tolerating frustration, who cannot survive without a breakdown, even with the experience of a projective identification with a mother who is capable of reverie. When we think of Wilfred Bion's concept of container-contained, we think of a proper counterpart in the concept of what we call attachment and its unconscious template. There is a relationship between container-contained and a living covenant between partners in a relationship, each of whom owns a portion of responsibility for its welfare. So it could be also husband and wife. The covenant is crucial because it provides the core for the development of the experience of faith in one's object. Some of the functions of a container first involve what Wilfred Bion called a negative container. And that has to do with the negative container object and how one can attack one's thinking and a linking with other objects, with other people. The term object is used to connote people in the field of psychoanalysis, and one's objects are internal. So we have an internal tie and relationship to significant others that in my field we call objects. It's not to objectify, but it's the phrase for understanding. So the negative container is the part of us that might attack our own thinking and attack the link between us and another. The positive container objects constitute the necessary element of thinking and of thinking with feeling. And it's only really when we think with feeling that a transformation can evolve. The positive elements of the container involve thinking, reverie, and when the mother or caretaker responds or informs her infant appropriately, meaning she can empathize with what one is feeling. There's another aspect of container contained that's really important in thinking about how people experience one another. Sometimes we can look at somebody with love, and sometimes that same person can turn into a monster before our eyes. When they turn into a monster, that same person who is love, it's an aspect of what we call projection and projective identification. So it can be used as a way to communicate to the other person that we're in distress if we act toward them like a monster. We might not know that we're in distress, but we are making this other person into the monster to feel our distress so we can get rid of it. In this process, one might be communicating with his own unconscious, with his own self. And again, it's the successful taking in of the projection, of the projective identification, for one to stop and think, wait a minute, I don't think he or she really means this to me. I think they're experiencing some kind of problem. It requires an enormous amount of patience on our part to stop and say, hey, wait a minute, what's going on? And it's only then when we can allow the other person, it's almost like, I'm going to use a Yiddish word, we vergin the other person to have projections. It's Wilfred Bion who believed that the infant introjects the experience. He takes in the experience of the other having successfully contained his projections and its contents. And it's by that where he can internalize the container and the containing function, which is why we said earlier that to experience containment, one had to feel it and one had to receive it. So, in other words, an infant can begin to what we call mentalize about himself, which means he could begin to think. It's the beginning of thinking, and it's the beginning of feeling that can help one realize, oh, wait, I said something off, or let me try another way, or I might have hurt her or hurt him, or I'm not having a good time with this whole virus thing. Let me rethink how I'm going to work my day. The infant is born with his or her own autonomous function to be able to transform and communicate in a sensory language. So the functions of the container is about having a communicative translator, but it's also like a mediator. It's a detoxifier. It's a filter. It helps one filter out what's going on the outside, what's going on the inside, and then how can I proceed? So it's sort of like having an internal monitor. The container contained function inspires people to a higher level of functioning. And remember, it requires trust and faith. So when we go, let's say, for example, to a therapist, we don't know that person. We don't expect our patient to trust us. It happens over time. And it's based on our presence, our reliability, our consistency, our showing up on time, and our maintaining a kind of neutral stance without judgment, of allowing projections, feelings, thoughts to emerge, things that people don't even realize they have.
Can you tell me about shifting roles in the construct of container contained? Because it would be an unhealthy relationship if one partner or person in the relationship is always the container and other contained.
Right. It has to be reciprocal. It has to shift.
So in a relationship where someone feels that they're being too much of a container, the irony is that I think many people think you have many couples where both feel that they're being the container.
Oh, absolutely.
What's your advice?
In a couple therapy, I often tell people, your partner is not the problem, and you're not the problem.
Can you tell me about shifting roles in the construct of container contained? Because it would be an unhealthy relationship if one partner or person in the relationship is always the container and other contained.
Right. It has to be reciprocal. It has to shift.
So in a relationship where someone feels that they're being too much of a container, the irony is that I think many people think you have many couples where both feel that they're being the container.
Oh, absolutely.
What's your advice?
In a couple therapy, I often tell people, your partner is not the problem, and you're not the problem. It's the absence of thought about your relationship. So when one is feeling that they're too much containing the other, they need to talk about it, and they need the other person to take responsibility for the life of the relationship too. It's not up to one person. It can't be one constant caretaker taking care of a partner and the whole relationship. Both people have to think about the life of the relationship. And let's say you're fighting with your partner. How is that fight? How is your disagreement affecting us? How is it affecting the relationship? He has a problem, let's say, with working too much, or addictions, or substance abuse, or too much internet. One needs to take a step back and ask him or herself, how is my behavior affecting not just my wife or my child, but how is it affecting my relationship?
When you're speaking about thinking, you also mentioned in terms of elements of the positive container reverie and empathy. I'm very interested in the notion of reverie, but it has to do with the capacity, dreaming has the capacity to do with imagination, that you can imagine a better future. And in the body, the basar is your flesh, that's the basura, the news you give to others. It's what you manifest. Your bones are atzamot. That's your etzem, your essence. And your blood, which is the intermediary between the bones and the flesh, is called dam, and it's connected to koach hadimayon, the power of the imagination. This is particularly associated with the mother.
Yeah.
She's connected with the red of the blood and the red of the bone marrow in particular, where the father is connected to the white of the bone.
How interesting.
Yeah, so it just, I was struck. You're speaking here about thinking, about paying attention to the relationship, thinking differently. Just tell me a little bit more about reverie, and then I have one question.
Reverie is it's like a mental state, It's not necessarily a thing we do.
Mm-hmm.
State of being. And it's complicated, of course, like everything else.
Would you connect it to the mother's capacity to envision something different from what's happening in the moment?
Well, it's very much connected to the mother, and without reverie, there can't be containment. The mother has to have a particular state of mind, which has to do with reverie.
But does that state of mind have to do with being able to go beyond the specific dynamic, so she's not taking it personally? The child is angry. She can contain and reflect that anger because she doesn't see it as directed to, it's not personally directed to her, it's resulting from the child's limitations or anger.
Right, but she would have to be empathic to what a child experiences. She would have to be empathic to her feelings and her identification with the baby. We need to identify in a certain way with our baby in order to help it and in order to have reverie. The idea of a mother as container. And the idea was, originally conceived by Wilfred Bion, who proposed that ideally it's mothers who are the recipients of their baby's projections, anxieties, projective identifications, and they contain and they hold what the baby is trying to communicate. Holding is a concept where we try to feel for. When we contain, we try to transform what we're getting. We try to transform the input of communication, and we put it back to the baby in a way that the baby might be able to comprehend. For example, if a baby is, throwing up or isn't very fussy, is not able to take milk, it would be up to the mother to say something like, I'm going to hold you and I'm going to be with you. You're in a really difficult state. You don't feel well. Your tummy hurts. I can understand that. And I will be with you in this moment while you work this through. And I will help work it through by holding you and by thinking about you and knowing how hard it might be for you in this moment. So in that, the infant would establish his or her own space, their inner space, where they can keep their anxieties, and also they have the experience of working through a difficult moment with that somebody else who's their mother. Okay? So according to what Bion thought, it's the mother and her capacity for reverie, her capacity to be the good enough mother who will hold the baby's unthinkable thought, mentally digest them through her maternal reverie. So rather than convey the emotion to the baby like, you're throwing up on me, you hate me, I know that you just want to spoil whatever I'm doing, which the baby might be thinking or feeling, the mother doesn't convey that to the baby. It's more about, you're not feeling well, let me help you through this, I'm going to be with you throughout. and I love you no matter what's going on. So maybe also the baby could figure out another solution to, let's say, being upset. Or I'll put you down in the crib and I'll be here for a moment while you try to wiggle it through your body. I mean, there are many ways we can deal with a difficult moment. So then rather than convey the mitigated emotion so that they can be safely taken back by the baby, it's a kind of maternal process that existed long before the infant was born. If you think about it, it's during pregnancy that the mother is already, her body, her mind is already serving as a container for her baby.
Mm-hmm.
And it's thought that it's the give and take of the placenta, the whole process of being a host and eating something good and nourishing that will be good for our baby is already setting the stage for containment, for nourishing, and for metabolizing the baby's needs and the baby's own waste products into her own body. So yes, it goes right to the heart of what you're thinking.
And that reverie and empathy and thinking are all linked to this capacity to take ourselves out of ourselves and to take ourselves out of this moment, imagining a different person's scenario or a different outcome in time.
Yeah.